Shabbat Shalom everybody, and welcome to this sermon on Parshat Shlach Lcha. In this week's Parsha, we read the story of the 12 spies. The Jews had left Egypt in the Exodus and were in the Sinai desert, ready to move into the promised land of Israel. Moses, sent spies into the land and told them to spy it out to see how easy it would be for the Jews to enter and settle there. It seemed out of character for Moshe to send the spies into the land of Israel. Could he not trust in God to make it all come right? And why did Moshe choose to send the very greatest of the Jews, the heads of the tribes? Nesiva Shalom explains that Israel was to be a holy civilization on holy land, a source of spirituality for the whole world. But like everything spiritual, if it is easily won, it is easily lost. The greater the prize, the more we must work for it. So to balance the spirituality of the Jewish mission and of the land itself, there had to be a counterweight of wickedness. And thus it was that the Canaanites who lived there before we did were depraved and disgusting in their personal lives, and also, in military terms, very strong. The battle the Jews had to wage to win this amazing place was in fact more spiritual than military, and the vanguard of that attack was composed of the greatest of the Jewish people, the leaders of the tribes. They were to be the first to subdue the spiritual filth of the land with the greatness of their lives of Torah, and they were to see how the rest of the Jewish people could best wage this spiritual war when they entered in their turn. Sadly, most of the spies, great as they were, failed in this task. They came back seeing the land of Israel through mortal eyes, having lost sight of God's guiding hand. Instead of telling the people that they had to be strong spiritually and that all would be well, they discouraged them, dwelling on the physical might of the Canaanites and warning that even God could not help against such overwhelming odds. Their defeatist report destroyed the faith of those who listened to them. The Jewish men of that time also succumbed to the spies' spiritual blindness, ignoring God's power and love, and despairing of the plan to live in Israel. As a punishment, the Jews had to wander for 40 years in the desert, and all the men who had followed the lead of the 10 spies would die in the desert and never enter the land that they believed were too strong for God to help them enter. It is a strange thing that among the laws of sacrifice that followed this sad failure, we find the law of Challah. The Jews, reeling with shock at the smashing up of the divine plan, were taught that when they baked dough, they had to separate the first part, the challah, and give it to a Kohen. It is a mitzvah that many of us are familiar with from the numerous lovely challah bakes that had taken place in our shul. If I had been there in the desert, I doubt I would have had the headspace for thinking about fiddling with my dough and finding a Kohen to give it to after the promised land had just been snatched away from me. And yet there the law stands, given to the Jews in the dreary glare of the Sinai desert, while they must have been crushed with a sense of disappointment and failure, and apprehensive about the doom of spending 40 years wandering in the desert until they died. How are we to understand the presence of this mitzvah and its context in our parasha? We can actually see the mitzvah of Challah as a defense against the spiritual challenge which defeated most of the spies. To reiterate, the spies could not retain their spiritual vision of God in the encounter with an evil that counterbalanced their own goodness. It was so hard not to get drawn into that physical way of seeing the world, and most of them succumbed, losing sight of God. What they and their generation needed was a reference point, a reset that reminded them of God as the creator and guide of the universe and of every human life. So God gave them the mitzvah of Challah, called Reishis Arisosechem, the first of your dough. That word Reishis might ring a bell. It means beginning, and is used in the very first word of the Torah, in Genesis 1:1, Bereshis, in the beginning. This word Reishis was also used to designate the beginning of the dough, Reishis Arisosechem. It is a clever trick. Every time the Jews baked their bread and risked being blinded by their physical needs and the doe's goodness and appeal. They were transported back to the very start of creation with a mitzvah called Rashis. They were taken back to the year dot when God's benevolent reign was clear and undeniable. The pristine vision of Adon Olam Hashem Alach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, the Lord of the universe who reigned before any creature was brought into being. That vision came back to them at that very moment, and all was well. In fact, the Midrash on Genesis 1:1 says that Bereshis, normally translated as in the beginning, can be taken to mean Bishvil Chala Shenikra Reshis, because of Chala that was called Reshis, the beginning of the dough. God only created the universe so that we would remember him and link up with him unfailingly, looking lovingly up to him, even when we are up to our elbows in dough, and thinking about the crusty soft bread that is soon to emerge steaming from the oven. This message is more relevant to us than perhaps it has ever been. The media news cycle pounds us relentlessly, driving us on from one topic to the next and not allowing a moment of serious reflection. Like the spies, we lose sight of God. They lost sight because they encountered the depths of evil. We lose sight because of the pull of an electronic screen and the media churn. Just the last couple of weeks show how breathless the whole thing is. COVID-19, George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, the toppling of statues across the world, the reopening of schools, the state of the economy, all have had their moment in the spotlight, all have claimed our attention, and all have faded from view. I say this not to trivialize what we have been through, not to dismiss the issues, but to lament our inattention to them. It is a mark of dishonor for humanity that so few of us devote sustained effort to any cause that deserves and needs our support. Homo Sapiens, the wise thinking human, is almost extinct. We are driven by and to distraction. Opening a Siddur or a Chumash seems so less important than catching up on the news, even though we know that today's news will be history in just a couple of days, whereas those little Hebrew words are the keys to happiness and immortality, helping us to see God at the dawn and sunset of history and every point in between. The mitzvah of Chala seems so humble, but in fact it ensures the grandeur of our vision, a grandeur that is fitting for the primeval greatness of the human condition as daughters and sons of God. Bereshis also stands for Bishvil Torah Shenikra Reshis, because of Torah that is called the first of God's ways. Whenever we do any of the mitzvahs of Torah, whenever we learn Torah itself, we are transported back through that word Reshis to that clear vision of God at the start of everything, and we are better able to import that vision back into our own troubled and distracted time. With that vision, we can serve as a permanent, rock-solid bastion of goodness for all time, levelling our indignation against those who are unjust, immoral, or godless in their personal lives, cavalier about the value and point of life itself. With our unflinching awareness of God, we can shine the gentle light of his Torah into the darkest despair of the human condition, bringing hope, purity and courage into a world that is sorely in need. Thanks for listening. Shabbat Shalom.